Kurt Cobain was the biggest rock star of his generation, right up there with the greats. Cobain is largely considered an anti-rock star, but nonetheless found huge fame with his band Nirvana. It's been almost 30 years since his death, but his influence is still deeply felt in music today. The ripple effect of records like Nevermind and In Utero continue to linger. But like most big rock stars, Cobain had major self-destructive tendencies. He dealt with a well-documented addiction to heroin, which crippled his last 2 years of life. When Nirvana took off in late 1991, Kurt began his slow downward spiral into drugs. This ultimately leads us to his death on April 5, 1994. The drugs didn't directly cause his death, but shortly before, he checked into the Exodus Recovery Center to help combat his growing addiction. This question has been asked numerous times, but what if Kurt didn't die in 1994? What if he kicked his addiction and got his life back on track? Today I'm going to go over what I think would have happened if April 5th, 1994 was just a regular day. A fun, hypothetical scenario. So it's early April 1994. Cobain is in rehab at Exodus Recovery Center following an intervention. It's well known he would leave rehab early, but let's say he stuck it out, staying at Exodus for however long it took to fully kick his habit. Typically, rehab ranges anywhere from 30 to 90 days, so we'll assume Cobain stayed the whole 3 months. Obviously, Nirvana is on the back burner at the moment while Kurt gets better, which led to Dave Grohl and Chris Novoselic having a lot of downtime. In May, Dave started taking his solo material more seriously. This led to him recording demo tracks with Chris. These tracks would show great promise as the two began playing them live at local gigs. Word started getting around Dave and Chris were working on material without Kurt, which initially triggered some skepticism. But most Nirvana fans were willing to give it a shot. After all, Dave began writing his first tracks while in Nirvana. 1992's cassette Pocket Watch was recorded while he was in the band. So Dave starting his own band was bound to happen while Kurt was away. That June, while Kurt remained in Exodus, Dave made his new band official, settling on the name Foo Fighters. For now, Dave and Chris preferred to remain a two-piece as they searched for the right drummer. During live shows, Dale Crover would contribute drums for the time being. After their fourth gig taking place in Seattle, the band would be spotted by an executive from Capitol Records. They were swiftly signed as their Nirvana fame was still red hot. Back to Kurt, it's now late June, 3 months since coming to Exodus. He's ready to come home after making amazing progress in rehab. He now had a new lease on life, having spent a lot of time self-reflecting. He was anxious to see his daughter, Frances Bean. While at Exodus, Kurt called his at-the-time wife, Courtney Love, informing her he wanted a divorce. The divorce was to be finalized later that year after Kurt returned. He officially left Exodus on June 26, 1994. Kurt met up with Pat Smear shortly after coming home from Exodus. Pat told him the news of Dave and Chris' new band, which he was actually happy to hear about. He'd been wanting to branch off from Nirvana for a while. He'd also previously heard tracks Dave recorded before rehab, which he thought were pretty good. Kurt was happy Dave and Chris were doing their own thing without him. It was actually a relief in many ways. At this point in time, Kurt's mind was elsewhere. He really just wanted to focus on being a father and taking his life back. Nirvana remained an afterthought during the summer of 1994, while Dave and Chris were slowly building a name for themselves with Foo Fighters. Pat Smear joined the band around this time, contributing additional guitar. When it came to Kurt and Courtney, they were separated while waiting for their divorce to be finalized. Their Seattle home was sold, with Kurt opting for a smaller place in Olympia, while Courtney found another home in Seattle. Kurt was prepared to be a stay-at-home father. While being a stay-at-home father, Kurt continued to write songs on his acoustic guitar. Right around the time of his intervention, there was talk of a potential collaboration with Michael Stipe of R.E.M. This obviously couldn't work at the time, but it now made more sense. Kurt was clean, and R.E.M. had finished recording their 1994 record Monster. So one day in August 1994, Kurt gave Stipe a call asking if he still wanted to collaborate. He did, so a short time later, Stipe flew to Kurt's new residence. That first night, they spent hours writing together. After a very productive writing session, Stipe stayed with Kurt for about a week. They wrote song after song in succession, even beginning to demo some new material on a 4-track. This sound was nothing like Nirvana, instead being very soft and ethereal. Something along the lines of Lead Belly, as Kurt was a huge fan. Songs Kurt wrote before rehab, such as Do Re Mi, would be reworked with Stipe, while new material kept flowing that was simply mesmerizing. The next month of September was busy for R.E.M. as Monster was to be released, so there was little time for Michael Stipe to make further progress with Kurt. But in early October, a window opened up to book a recording session. Kurt booked a week with Scott Litt at the Hall of Justice in Seattle, under a pseudonym to avoid attention. The first 2 days, Kurt was there alone, recording 4 acoustic tracks. On day 3, Stipe arrived and immediately great progress was made. The pair recorded 5 tracks together, with a couple coming together spontaneously in the moment. Everything came together swiftly and naturally. Recording wrapped on October 11, 1994, with mixing taking an additional 2 weeks. The next couple months, Kurt continued to lay low. Back to Dave and Chris, their new band, Foo Fighters, was about to enter the studio to record their debut album. Dave had already written most tracks long beforehand, so recording was a very in-and-out process. By the end of October, Kurt and Courtney's divorce was finalized. They began amicably sharing custody of Frances Bean. In the first part of 1995, Chris decided to leave Foo Fighters, primarily to focus on his new band, Sweet 75. Back to Kurt, his collaborative record with Michael Stipe was complete, an 11-track album full of vulnerable folk tunes, comparable to the tone of MTV Unplugged. This record would be released under Kurt's name and was set to drop on March 3, 1995. Kurt's self-titled debut received a very mixed reception. Many Nirvana fans didn't quite understand it. These songs were not as accessible and a lot more challenging, but there was also a large number of fans that loved the record. It was clear Kurt was entering new territory as a creative force. In terms of sales, the self-titled album did well, all things considered, especially for being a surprise release, but obviously couldn't reach the heights of Nirvana. Kurt decided against touring for the album, instead playing one-off shows in Washington at local lounges and clubs. Even these shows were few and far in between. Meanwhile, Foo Fighters' debut dropped that summer. It was a hit with singles such as I'll Stick Around and Big Me permeating the airwaves. Dave's band was doing very well, all over MTV, quickly taking off in a big way. Unlike Kurt, Dave was driven to take his band as far as possible, touring as much as necessary. At the same time, Kurt felt Nirvana had one more album in them. The band never formally broke up. So one day in October 1995, Kurt called Dave and Chris and asked if they wanted to do one final Nirvana album. They both said yes. It was no secret Kurt burned a lot of bridges during his addiction. The last time Kurt saw Chris in March 1994 resulted in an ugly confrontation. Not to mention, Kurt's relationship with Dave wasn't in great shape either. So when the three found themselves in the same room together, there was some tension. But once Dave and Chris realized Kurt was sober and had truly changed, the tension quickly faded away. Just like before, the trio still had undeniable chemistry music-wise. After jamming over a few days, magic was in the air. But things were different now. Nirvana's fourth album came together a lot differently than before. The trio were rarely all together in the studio. Recording yet again took place at the Hall of Justice, and Kurt quickly got to work. He laid down track after track, letting songs come together spontaneously in the heat of the moment. He would also take this opportunity to perfect older songs, including Sappy, Opinion, and Talk to Me. By the time Chris or Dave even set foot in the studio, Kurt was done with all guitar tracks. Chris took 2 sessions to record bass, while Dave knocked out all the drums in 2 sessions as well. Kurt then came back to the studio a week later to record vocals. Produced by Scott Litt, Nirvana's 4th record was completed in February 1996. The sound of Nirvana's 4th record was a cross between Nevermind and In Utero. Some tracks were single-driven and easy to nod your head to, while others were very abrasive and experimental. It was clear Kurt still had some anger to get out of his system. This album essentially acted as Nirvana's final hurrah, an album for the fans. When it was released on June 21, 1996, it topped the Billboard charts. A big success for the band, similar to 1993's In Utero, but not as successful as Nevermind. Nirvana's 4th record would sell 3 million copies over the next year. Its lead single, Talk to Me, was a big hit, but there was no tour for the album. Nirvana did play a few high-profile festivals, notably Lollapalooza and Reading, but aside from that, there wasn't too much activity from Nirvana. It was obvious the trio just weren't as passionate. Kurt was much more excited about his solo material, Dave had Foo Fighters, and Chris had Sweet 75. After the band's Reading gig on August 25, 1996, Nirvana officially called it quits. In early 1997, Kurt began writing tracks for his next solo album. This time he wanted to be completely solo. Though he found a lot of joy collaborating with Michael Stipe, he opted for a new direction. In terms of fatherhood, things were amazing. Frances Bean was the sole reason Kurt found the strength to get sober in the first place. Kurt was sharing custody of Frances with Courtney with few issues. Courtney had also gotten sober and ended up marrying Billy Corgan. 1997 was a pretty low-key year for Kurt, spending much of his time at home caring for Frances while writing songs. But he hit a bit of a wall creatively. His first album came together so fluidly, but this time around, writer's block was a real issue. Shortly after recording raps for Foo Fighters' second album, drummer Taylor Hawkins was brought on board. In May 1997, the band released their sophomore record, The Color and the Shape, a massive hit that brought the band to the next level. Kurt was very happy for Dave and his success. He even made an appearance at a Foo Fighters gig that summer. Chris also released his one and only record with Sweet 75 in August, a self-titled album that largely went under the radar. In 1998, things started to go south. In March, Kurt ran into his old friend Dylan Carlson after not seeing him for about 4 years. They decided to hang out a bit, going back to Dylan's place. Everything was okay until Dylan shot up in front of Kurt. After being clean for so long, Kurt thought to himself, maybe I could just shoot up one more time, not a big deal. This would be a major mistake. Kurt very quickly fell back into bad habits, using heroin and not taking care of himself. It was 1992 all over again, isolating himself in his home and using drugs. The majority of 1998 saw Kurt sinking deeper into drug use, hardly making any further progress on his second solo record. In December, Kurt put his foot down. He needed to be there for Frances Bean. He decided to check himself into rehab for 30 days on December 28, 1998. On January 27, 1999, Kurt left rehab. He then returned to his home in Olympia. In February, he really got to work on new music. The past year gave Kurt a lot to write about, falling back into drugs and coming out on the other side yet again. He began recording demos, finally with enough material for a full album. But this was a tough time for Kurt for a big reason. He lost custody of Frances Bean after a very rough December. Not currently allowed to see his daughter, Kurt entered a bout of depression. He fought so hard to beat his addiction for her in 1994 and again just recently. He felt he lost his will to stay sober, so once again reached out to Dylan to find drugs. February saw Kurt come back to heroin, spending $1,000 a day on his habit. It was worse than ever before. On March 13, 1999, Kurt would die from an overdose at his home. He just turned 32. The demos he was working on would never see the light of day. I just couldn't foresee Kurt making it to the new millennium. It might sound kind of messed up, but I feel Kurt Cobain was going to die young, regardless of the cause. I have a very hard time picturing Kurt living into his 40s, let alone 50s. In a lot of ways, this world really wasn't made for someone like Cobain. Hopefully this hypothetical scenario is entertaining. I had a lot of fun writing it. Who really knows what really would have happened if Kurt Cobain didn't die in 1994? Either way, the man was a genius, and there's really no denying that. Anyway, I hope you all have a great day, and I'll see you later.